Podcast Playlist.
You are listening to Podcast Playl.ist, a podcast about podcasts, where I, Brendan Hutchins, share what I've been listening to and why you should listen too. This is the 4th out of 5 episodes focused on news and politics podcasts. Typically, I focus on one podcast per episode to dive into the details, but Crooked Media, a new podcast network, has 5 worthwhile shows to display unique purpose and design. Interviews, panel discussions, emotional conversations, and even a game show. I couldn't share just one.
I'm not running against crooked Hillary Clinton. I'm running against the crooked media. That's what I'm running against.
Candidate Trump said this on the campaign trail. At the time, a group of former aides to President Obama met on a podcast called Keeping It 1600, where they discussed how and why Hillary should be the next president. After the election, they were devastated and confused, so they went on a hiatus and created a new plan of action. They left their position at The Ringer, a network owned by Bill Simmons, to start their own podcast network, and in January 2017, Crooked Media was born. On Crooked Media's website, they state their mission. We're not journalists, we're not unbiased, we're not always serious, and we're certainly not always right. But we promise a no-bullshit conversation about politics where you can laugh, cry, scream, ridicule us daily, share your ideas, and hopefully decide that you want to help fix this mess too. That goes for Democrats who want to learn from our party's mistakes, Republicans who hold Trump accountable, and everybody everywhere who's been asking the same question. What do we do now? What do we do now? This is the question that dominates many of the political podcasts that go beyond reporting just the headlines. The question that keeps the hosts up at night. Crooked Media's answer? Activism. We'll start with their first and biggest show, Pod Save America. This podcast is the most dedicated to the mission of activism. Pod Save America is a panel show with rotating hosts Jon Favreau, Dan Pfeiffer, Jon Lovett, and Tommy Viator, discussing the news and scandals of the week. This crew won't tell you that they're unbiased or down the middle. They are liberal and proud of it, openly mocking many Republican leaders for their hypocrisy, missteps, and outright lies. In February 2017, Katie Couric was a guest, and it's hard to tell at times who's interviewing whom. But that's part of what makes this podcast great. The hosts facilitate thoughtful and engaging political discussions rather than preach to their pod choir.
Well, before we go, because I know you guys have given me more time than you schedule, which I really appreciate.
This is better than me.
I know you all
given us more time. You've given us the time.
But let's talk about it with Crooked Media. Are you trying to convert people to the cause, or are you just preaching to the choir?
We want to do a lot of converting here. We want to do a lot of brainwashing. No, we do. We think, like I said, I would love this company to expand its audience, right, and to reach more people who might, especially people who might not have been as engaged in politics as they want to be now, right? Because there's like you said, you can't escape Trump, right? We are at a moment in our history now where more people are paying attention to politics than they have been in quite some time, and for that new audience that's tuning in, you know, that's who we want to reach, and I think mostly they're younger too.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's arming people with information and resources, and I think that's hopefully a role we can play. I think that there's taking somebody from being less engaged to more engaged, and then I think there is also room for people who may not have heard a kind of, I don't know, I mean, look, it sounds like branding, but like kind of a no bullshit conversation that maybe has a liberal perspective, but might be accessible to somebody who isn't sure what their politics are, maybe thinks they're a Republican, or maybe has been conservative in the past, but hey, you know, we're pretty okay guys. I'm hilarious. That helps.
Other guests include Trevor Noah from The Daily Show, Senator Elizabeth Warren, Senator Kamala Harris, and even President Barack Obama.
Who do you see out there in the Democratic Party today as a rising star that sort of has that sense of principle and courage that you see coming up? The new generation.
You know, I think there's a bunch of folks who are doing really interesting stuff in Congress. You know, folks like Kamala Harris, who just got elected, people who've been there a while, like Michael Bennet. Really good people and really talented and in it for the right reasons. So, and then we've got a bunch of guys who used to work with you and are still trying to do something with their lives instead of having podcasts. You got,
this is a launching pad for Favreau 2024.
Pod Save America answers, what do we do now? With discussions between hosts and interviews with politicians, reporters, and more, so you are more informed and equipped to get out and make a difference. At the end of almost every episode, there's a call to action. Is there a big protest coming up? Here's where to find more info. Are Republicans trying to abolish healthcare in secret again? Here are the senators that can be swayed. Through their passion for human rights activism and transparency, Pod Save America is becoming a staple for news and information on the left. Pod Save America is 60 to 90 minutes and typically comes out on Mondays and Thursdays. The second show that Crooked Media created is Pod Save the World, an effort to understand all the foreign policy actions and missteps of the current administration. Tommy Viator hosts the pod and interviews one expert in foreign policy per episode, or a previous colleague from his time at the White House under Obama. Some of these experienced guests include Ben Rhodes, Obama's Deputy National Security Advisor, Mike McFaul, former U.S. Ambassador to Russia, and Tim Kaine, current Senator of Virginia. These experts put the news of the week in context and provide their opinions of what would be best going forward. One of my favorite episodes includes an interview with Lisa Monaco, Obama's Homeland Security Advisor and Chief Counterterrorism Advisor.
Another issue I know that you worked on and thought about a lot is cybersecurity, particularly the ability of terrorists to attack a utility or a power grid. The Washington Post recently reported that the Russian government has devised a weapon that could take down our power grid and noted that they use this tool in Ukraine to shut down 1/5 of the electric power generated in Kiev. This scares the hell out of me. How vulnerable do you think we are to these sorts of attacks, and like how high up on the list of things that I lie in bed on Sunday nights and feel anxious about should the power grid getting taken out be?
So, Tommy, this is a great opportunity for a public service announcement.
Okay,
because there are too many things you're lying in bed worrying about.
Good.
And so I think it's important for especially our younger listeners to know that there are things we can do about these things we're worried about. And that's why public service is so cool. Because if you get to go and work on some of these challenges, what you will recognize is that, yes, they are extremely hard things, but they're really worth working on, and we can really make a difference through the power of American innovation in meeting those challenges. So on the grid, yes, there are big threats, and are those countries that might want to mess with us have understood that the power grid is essentially a soft underbelly. And so we do see that adversaries are interested in assessing how much damage they could do if they were to attack the grid. And because the grid is now increasingly integrated due to the fact that we have such advanced technology, and because we're working to incorporate many different sources of supply in a grid that is responsive to the needs of consumers, we face significant threats, especially from cyber attack. We learn from the threats that we observe in the world, and when the Ukrainian grid was attacked in the winter of 2015, the Department of Energy sent a team to work with the Ukrainian government, our partner, to evaluate what had happened. And then not only did we help the Ukrainians with addressing that challenge, but we also brought in the leaders of many American utilities with whom I worked closely when I was at the Department of Energy. We acquired clearances for them so that they could be briefed on classified information, and we talked to them about our analysis of the threat and what they could do to make themselves more resilient and secure against those kinds of threats. And so what we have now built is a very close partnership, crossing what is normally a very difficult divide between government and the private sector, to work closely to develop and deploy the solutions that will make our grid more secure. And a lot of the work on that is actually being done in federal government labs that are owned and operated by the Department of Energy or managed by the Department of Energy. And they are doing the kind of innovation that grows out of the nuclear weapons program, for example. So you want to be sure your nuclear weapons are safe from cyber attack.
Yes.
Yeah. And that innovative work can also be applied to work on the grid, on making the grid more secure.
Pod Save the World is 45 minutes and drops most Wednesdays. With Friends Like These is the next podcast in the Crooked Media lineup. AnnaMarieCox, novelist and contributor to The Daily Beast, is the host, facilitating discussions across the aisle, whether that aisle is politics, race, feminism, disabilities, or other divisions in our culture. Anna and her guests share values and discuss an issue in detail to find some lesson or moral for the audience to walk away with. But this show really shines when, in the episodes where she converses with someone who has different views or perspectives that open the discussion to another level. These episodes often turn emotional, uncomfortable, and fascinating.
Hi, I'm AnnaMarieCox, and welcome to With Friends Like These. This is a show that I intended to be about difficult conversations. Sometimes we have the difficult conversations themselves, and other times we kind of prepare for them, right? But astute listeners may have realized that I have been avoiding a very specific, difficult conversation, which is a conversation with an actual, real-life, honest-to-God Trump supporter. Even the show's first episode, which was an interview with a Wisconsin pastor whose congregants were Trump supporters, was not really an interview with a Trump supporter. Well, this episode addresses that missing link. I have for you here interviews with about half a dozen Trump supporters. They're all taken from outside Trump's Cedar Rapids, Iowa rally earlier this week. And I'm going to present them pretty unvarnished. And I had a whole essay prepared about what I thought it all means and lessons I took and, some deep introspection into the state of the country and state of our politics. But I have decided to forego those reflections for now and instead let you just hear what these people had to say. And I'm going to put you in the rhetorical position that I took voluntarily, which is I didn't argue with these folks. So don't hurt your phone or your speakers when they say things that are plainly untrue and sometimes offensive. Just try and listen.
It's through these discussions that I question my habits, actions, morals, and the respect I show to my fellow humans. Culture critic Ira Madison III was on the episode Discomfort is the Tool of Oppression to talk about race and what it's like to be the black friend.
People should be aware of it. I think the problem actually is when people when they feel too comfortable, I think there should always be a degree of discomfort just because we're talking about uncomfortable things, Black people's lives aren't comfortable. So why should white people who want to know more about Black people and, what they're going through in their daily lives, why should that process be comfortable for them? This isn't a exact example, but, I am not transgender. I don't. It's a
rubbing
revelation.
Eyes.
But I don't. So I did not know that much about transgender men and women a few years ago. It's through following trans people online. Becoming friends with them, reading their work. Mm-hmm. I particularly love Janet Mock, Raquel Willis online.
Parker Malloy.
Parker Malloy. I love Parker Malloy. Kat Black. And a lot of it actually is you want to learn more. So that you can educate yourself. Because I feel like if you get to a point, the problem when someone has just the one Black friend is when they feel too content, like they know everything. It's like, I don't even know everything about white people. I've seen Spin City, but
but you know me, so you could I'm pretty representative of white people.
But some white people will be like, oh, I have this Black friend, or I grew up with this Black friend. I get it all, but you don't get it all. Just how by interacting with these great people online, I don't know all there is
about the transgender experience.
About the transgender experience, and which is why I continue to read more. I listen when they say something. But I also treat them as friends and colleagues online.
This caused many feels for me, and I had to question my position on race. It's not just enough to think of others as equal, but one must also interact, make mistakes, and learn to be a true advocate. With Friends Like These is 60 to 90 minutes and drops most Fridays. On the topic of race relations, the last interview show is Pod Save the People with host DeRay McKesson, a Black Lives Matter activist known for his participation in protests including Ferguson and Baltimore. He facilitates a discussion with Brittany Packnett and Sam Singyangwe, co-founders of Campaign Zero for Police Reform and OurStates.org, a visual resource to see where your state stands in the fight to preserve or achieve immigration, reproductive, voting, and economic justice. I'll link to these in the show notes.
Conservatives and the Republicans, they'll always be talking about, in theory, and this sort of value of limited government and not having this government intervention, but they're completely silent about the power of the government to just take away your child, right? Like one of the most severe things that you can think about. They don't have anything to say about that, right? And it shows you how race really structures your political ideology and has been structuring what political ideology has been in this country for so long.
What this makes me think of, though, is from a policy perspective, what are the consequences sometimes of well-intentioned things that we've not thought through? So what are those unintended consequences, and how do we bring them to light and then quickly course correct? Because I could see people saying, if children are being abused, there should be a process to make sure they're not being abused anymore. I think most of us agree that should exist. And that is a pure thought that comes from a good place. But then it's like, well, here are the 50 examples of where that pure intention actually can lead us astray and do harm in a completely different way. So you take a kid away from one environment with the assumption that them being somewhere else is actually a better thing. And that other place, as Brittany talked about, has long-lasting negative consequences. Like that wasn't, I'm sure, people's goal when they made CPS. But what does it mean from a policy perspective, or as a person in elected office or as somebody who runs an agency, to know that the system is actually broken, that like even the best intent is it's just not working out the way people thought, and not course correct quick enough. So now that we know, we can't fix what we don't know. So now that the research is clear, and now that people's lives and the stories are really clear about the consequences, I'm interested in see how quickly the system will self-correct and what pressure needs to happen to make that real.
After the panel discussion with Brittany and Sam on recent news and upcoming activism, Dre will interview a guest about race, social justice, and politics. Recent guests include Congressman Keith Ellison and NYU professor David Kamen, but also musicians John Legend and Katy Perry. The conversation that has stuck with me the most is DeRay interviewing Edward Snowden about cybersecurity, the relationship of race and surveillance, and the prospect of Snowden ever returning home to the United States.
Now, I've not read you talk about race much. I know when we had our last talk on Twitter, we talked about it a little bit, but I'd love to know, how do you think about the relationship between race and security, race and surveillance, race and activism? What did you either learn while you were, the years that you've been sort of away from the country or since the protests began? I'd love to hear you talk about your understanding of race in this moment.
This is a great question, and it's an important one because we don't talk about it enough, particularly in politics, because largely when we're talking about race, we're talking about minority groups, right? Whether they're religious minorities, whether they're racial minorities, whether they're vulnerable populations in one segment of society or another, it's all talking about power imbalance at the core, right? It's easy for one reason or another, even if it's something as simple as skin color, to start creating divisions in society, in our communities, and go, there's an us and a them. And the people who look like us, who talk like us, who believe like us, who live like us, we're going to look out for them. But these other people, right, they're not like us. They're different. And this is one of the central challenges in the surveillance movement, right, when we're trying to reform surveillance, is people go, well, I don't care, because people aren't looking for me, right? They're looking for someone who may be Arabic, right? Or they're looking for somebody in a heavily policed community in Baltimore, right, in a white neighborhood who happens to be black, and, they're out after dark. So people like police officers go, oh, that person, they probably don't belong here, right? It's these snap judgments, these silent prejudices that get baked into the fabric of our belief system, and eventually creates this dynamic where we go, all right, we'll create these extraordinary policing powers. This doesn't matter whether we're talking about policing violence, right? Whether we're talking about arrests, whether we're talking about court sentencing, or whether we're talking about surveillance capabilities that are primarily used in minority or impoverished neighborhoods. a greater level of power is established and then selectively applied. You never see these powers being used against the most privileged members of society, right? Bill Gates doesn't have the FBI coming after him, leaving cards on his door that say, hey, can you give us a call? We just want you to know we're watching, basically. Very, very polite warning. Thank you, FBI.
Pod Save the People is a 90-minute show dropping on Tuesdays. The last show of the current Crooked Media lineup is Lovett Or Leave It, a game show of sorts hosted by Jon Lovett, live in front of an audience with 3 political or comedian guests to rant and mock the week's news. Breaking slightly from the drumbeat of activism, it's the chaser to sweeten the palate after a week of heavy stories. Jon will typically give a short monologue and then bring out the guests. Different segments are rotated, including OK Stop, where panelists watch a news segment and yell OK Stop to interrupt and fulminate on when the pundits or politicians say something ridiculous. They also feature a rant wheel that virtually spins and lands on one of the guests' half-dozen pre-arranged topics, anything from S-Town's popularity and backlash to what Ivanka Trump is doing or not doing, to Steve Bannon being in the White House, to Wonder Woman. Another segment is Too Stupid to Be True, where an audience member plays a guessing game to win a sponsored Parachute Sheets gift card. But Jon has a reputation of not playing by his own rules.
Okay. The reason this is important is I'm an independent with Republican leanings, and you are shifting me with every single podcast.
Well,
that is why this is important.
You just bought yourself a spot on this panel, lady.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
We tell people that that's happening, but we rarely have proof.
It is true.
So here's how the game works.
All right, I'm ready.
Each of our panelists has a quote. One of the quotes comes from a pundit. 2 of the quotes are too stupid to also be true.
Yes, I play this every week, I know.
So now you know that every time we've done this in the past, I've been lying. They've all been true.
Right.
But I want to tell you right now that these are not 3 real quotes from 3 dumb pundits, okay? I am not lying about that. Do you believe me?
No.
You should believe me. I am telling the truth. These are not 3 quotes that I went and found from 3 pundits who said something really stupid to try to trick you into thinking that only one of them was real. Okay? Do you believe me?
How many are real?
1 is real.
1. Okay.
Ish.
Okay.
I'm telling you.
I don't believe you.
I told you, man. It's on you. You knew what you were. You knew the risks.
Our first quote. This is a quote about Trump sacrificing his own popularity for the mission of Ryan's healthcare bill. Mike?
Quote, think of President Trump as the Martin Luther King of healthcare. End quote.
Very stupid. Too stupid to be true? You don't know. Don't comment.
Thank you.
Our second quote is supposedly a pundit reacting to what happened aboard that United flight before the cameras were rolling.
Quote, I was thinking back to Rodney King and that infamous video of his being beaten by LA cops. What we didn't see was what the precipitating incident was.
Also very stupid. And finally, a pundit asked whether or not it's hypocritical for Donald Trump to criticize Barack Obama for playing golf and then playing golf himself over and over again as president.
Quote, did President Obama play golf on his own golf course? I don't think so.
Now, Tracy, I am telling you, okay, I promise you, these are not quotes from 3 random pundits. You need to pick which one is true. And the prize is $100 from a little company called Parachute.
Is that
true?
true?
Is it a robe? Oh, there's a robe. It's a robe from Parachute.
Oh, well, I need the sheets, too.
Play hardball, John. You got to negotiate her down.
Tracy, here's the thing. Mike made a point that I was wrong to choose you. That I owned whatever happened after, and it was your job to prove that I was right, to trust you. So far, I'm not sure.
I think we're good.
You think you and I are good?
We're good, yeah.
I like this. I think this is working.
All right, good. I think so.
Jason, do you think it's working?
This is working. It doesn't matter what he thinks. This is working. We're good.
Pick a fucking quote. Do you think that it was Martin Luther King, Rodney King, or Obama didn't own a golf course like an idiot?
I think of President Trump as the Martin Luther King of healthcare.
Well, here's the thing. Now, they are not 3 quotes from 3 real pundits. They are 3 quotes from 1 pundit. They are all quotes by our man on CNN, Jeffrey Lord.
Lovett or Leave It comes out between Friday and Saturday and is just over an hour. I realize that it's a big time commitment to listen to all of the crooked media empire. So, if you only have time to listen to one of the 5 shows, I would start with Pod Save America. In addition to being the most well-rounded show, they invite the hosts of the other shows to talk about the guests and conversations, so you can get a sample of the whole network.
So, but anyway, you guys want to hear about the pod this week?
Who's on this week? What are you talking about and who's on?
Well, I'm real excited about this week's. It is a very, very awkward couple of conversations in the sense that they're about uncomfortable subjects. Mm-hmm. One of my guests is a woman who is a comprehensive sex education instructor in the Chicago area. And she would be interesting to talk to, at any point in time, because that's an important subject and a controversial one. Yeah. But I am talking to her this week because over the weekend, the Center for Investigative Reporting, in fact, on their Reveal publication, broke the news that HHS cut over $200 million in funding for research into preventing teen pregnancies, which is crazy on many different levels. First of which is that they basically wasted money because what they did was cut funding that the Obama administration had already given for 5-year grants to research the scientifically, validated ways that we can reduce teen pregnancy. By cutting the funding halfway through, they've made the impossible for researchers to use the data that they've collected.
You can find more about these podcasts at getcrookedmedia.com, and the links will be in the show notes. In the spirit of activism, I encourage you to check out democracy.io, a website with a simple form to contact your senators and representatives and share your support or opposition of their actions. By making an effort on the local level, you can make an impact on the national level. I use this form to reach to my senators, Ron Wyden and Jeff Merkley, and Representative Earl Blumenauer, to thank them for promoting Oregon values of equality and compassion in Congress. And they all responded to my message with appreciation that I reached out. A link will be in the show notes. This was episode 4 on my series of news and politics podcasts. Now that data, investigation, context, and activism podcasts have been covered, the final episode in this series will be the rest of the political podcasts I'll continue to listen to. I'm happy to say that this podcast is supported by Audible, and you can go to audibletrial.com/podcastplaylist to receive a free audiobook. It's yours to keep, and 30 days access to their other features and like daily deals and more. Senator Elizabeth Warren, a guest on Pod Save America, has a new book called This Fight is Our Fight, available on Audible. And here's a sample.
Workers' pay hadn't kept pace with inflation. Productivity had gone up, profits had gone up, executives had gotten raises. Couldn't we at least come together to make sure that people who did some of the hardest, dirtiest work in the nation got at least a chance to build a little security? And couldn't we also give this whole bipartisan thing another try? Since the 1930s, Republicans had joined Democrats to support periodic increases in the minimum wage. And now, after 4 years of holding steady, I thought we might come together for some kind of an increase. Okay, it probably wouldn't be as much as I wanted, but couldn't we at least do something? No. The Republicans were locked in. They would block any effort to increase the minimum wage by even a few nickels.
Please visit audibletrial.com/podcastplaylist to get this or any audiobook for free. It's yours to keep forever. And you'll get access to the service for 30 days. That's audibletrial.com/podcastplaylist. And it really does make a difference to supporting the show. This episode was recorded in the Liberal Oasis, Portland, Oregon. Writing and narration by me, Brendan Hutchins. The producer and script editor was Sarah Hutchins, and moral support and infinite distractions were provided by Sebastian and Autumn, Sarah and my cats. For more podcast recommendations and to rate and review podcasts yourself, head to podchaser.com, a new site devoted to podcast discovery. A cross between IMDb to track hosts and guests, and what Letterboxd is for movies and Goodreads is for books, Podchaser is a social home for rating and reviewing podcasts and episodes. You can use my beta key, Podplay, PODPLAY, for access to Podchaser during the beta, and a link will be in the show notes. Hey, this is a podcast. This podcast is hosted on the incredible Podiant.co podcasting platform that has a free unlimited tier and upgrades for services and features. If you're looking to host your own podcast, check it out and send me a link. I'd love to hear your show. Send me your comments, suggestions, and recommendation success stories. I'm at the Pod Playlist on Twitter. I'm on Facebook at Podcast Playlist. I'll accept text or audio messages to the podcast playlist at gmail.com. You can leave a comment on the post at podcastplayl.ist, where you can also see the show notes. In the immortal words of Mike Burkett from NoFX, the People's Revolution is going to be a podcast.
Podcast Playlist.